Hi there, Sonia here. Welcome back to another episode of the Help I'm Artist podcast. Now, I love seeing artists succeed, and that's why I make this podcast. This podcast is there to help artists like you get more clear and confident about making and selling your art. As artists, so much about what we do comes from within us. How we feel and what we think will literally determine our steps. And that is why I focus so much on the mindset behind good art. In order to grow in our art and actually earn a living from our creativity, we need to not only develop our artistic skills, but we also need to adopt a healthy business mindset. As artists, we need to realize that we are in business. Let's face it, we all want to make an impact with our art. Bring that which is on the inside out in a more powerful and impactful way. We want to not only make our art, but we also want to sell it. But how do we do this? How do we reach our potential art audience? And what tools can we use to communicate this? The Help I'm Artist podcast is here to help you on your journey, whether you're just starting out or you've been a working artist for a while. This week we have a special treat. I had the opportunity to talk with South African fine artist Malcolm Dewey. At the beginning of the year, after being bedridden for nearly 3 weeks with an aggressive flu, I had just about had enough. I was ready for some color and some beauty. I opened my laptop and started scrolling through numerous Pinterest feeds and was stopped in my tracks when I saw vivid impressions of views and vistas that were all too familiar. This had to be South Africa. It turned out that I had landed on the social feed of South African fine artist Malcolm Dewey. I did a little digging and discovered that Malcolm hosted an artist podcast, and because I wasn't going anywhere soon and had to get rid of this fever and flu, I had time to listen. I think it must have been around the third episode in which Malcolm talks about following your art dreams, and that we should quit making excuses and get going. He literally said, if you want to make an artist podcast, then just do it. Because I was considering starting my own artist podcast for some years, his words really hit home. I vowed that as soon as I was feeling better, I would make a plan and get my podcast in the air. And the rest is history. So I'm really honored to have him in my show, because actually this podcast is a little bit his fault. Stay tuned because Malcolm has a special artist resource for you to download. I will tell you more about that at the end of the show. But now let's get going and listen to the story of Malcolm Dewey. Well, Malcolm, thank you so much for joining me on my Help I'm Artist podcast, all the way from sunny South Africa.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. As you mentioned, I live in South Africa, a small little seaside town called Port Alfred. I live with my wife. I've got 3 boys, all pretty much grown up now. The youngest one is has just finished his schooling. I'm working as an artist full time.
When did you realize first that being an artist is something that you wanted to pursue at a serious level?
At a serious level, you're right. It was much later in life. I did want to be an artist when I left school, and I did look into it. That was in the 80s. I looked into it fairly seriously at the time, but I think I was the only one who really believed in that idea. Those were different times. I was going to be pushed in sort of directions of fashion design or textile design. And of course, I had my eyes on, at the time I was into graphic art, graphic design, commercial art. But I chickened out and went to university and studied law, sort of following a loose family tradition there. All through that time, I was doing artistic stuff. It just seemed to happen that way. I graduated, I started a law practice, practiced on my own. You know, we had a young family and we did what we had to do to support our family. But I was constantly looking at art books. I was doing art on the weekend. My wife's also very creative. we really felt stuck. Probably in my late 30s, early 40s, in that sort of time when we start looking at our lives. And one weekend I just started, my children had some oil pastels and there was a drawing book open, and I think it was a public holiday, and my wife and I were just sitting at the table, and I started playing around with that, and I ended up completing a landscape in pastels, and she really liked it, and we actually had it framed. It was really the first painting I had done that I put in a frame in about, I don't know, 20 years. From that point on, it was just then every week I was doing paintings. At the same time, we were homeschooling our kids, and I was running a practice. I don't know how we did it, but I worked in my practice in the mornings. In the afternoons, I did some art, and I just rescheduled my diary, slowly reducing the practice and expanding the art. Blogging, doing all sorts of things for years before I made the final leap, and I had to unbundle my practice, which was a very traumatic and difficult thing to do.
What steps did you take to go from being the lawyer, having your law firm, and becoming that full-time artist? Just some practical steps.
Step one is you've got to really identify what are your pain points, what's your real fear. If it's financial, then you've got to learn about finances. It's no good being an artist and you know nothing about business and finance. You've got to work out, maybe you got to talk to your accountant, you got to go online, research what you need to live off, figure out what's your worst case scenario. And then with knowledge comes a lot of peace of mind. Then you can make a plan. The other thing is clearly you've got to up your art game as well. And that meant acknowledging that while I was a keen artist, I had a lot to learn about producing professional quality work. There is a transition from part-time or hobby painting to full-time professional art. At the point where collectors and perhaps other experts, gallery owners, knowledgeable people can say, all right, you're really doing some good work here. Talk to people that are important in that process as well. You've got to have your family on board. With that support comes a lot of extra courage and does clear the way.
And that process of really developing your skills, did you go back to school? Did you do a lot of self-learning? How did you up your skills and come to the level of working as a full-time artist?
I didn't go back to any formal schooling. I did attend other artists' workshops, a few artists that I admired, and if there was someone visiting from overseas, I tried to make a plan of attending that workshop, even if it was some distance away. Obviously, all the other routes that you can find on the internet, from videos to books, of course. I'm quite an avid reader. And then just practicing. I'll never forget one artist. I went on his workshop and he said to me, he likes teaching professionals. And I thought, oh, yes, why is that? And he says, because they are like a dog with a bone. They won't let the thing go, and they're determined to learn. And I thought, well, all right, I'll take that as a compliment. And that's the way you have to be. My biggest obstacles was simply getting a state of mind where I wasn't anxious about my other work. But once that started tapering off, then I really felt much more confident and much happier about expanding my art practice. We still, sometimes my wife and I talk to each other and we still can't believe we in the situation we're in, where we can create art literally from when we get up to the end of the day. So that seems almost too good to be true at times.
If you were to describe your artistic style, how would you describe who you are as an artist and your art?
I would definitely say I am inspired by the Impressionist style of painting. It can be called a contemporary style of Impressionism. It's also called painterly style. Basically a loose sort of approach to painting representational subjects. And it really literally doesn't matter what subject, maybe whether it's landscape or portrait. It's just that loose sort of juicy, nice thick paint work, brush work, and that really appeals to me very much. Any sort of light effect in nature gets me running for my paintbrushes as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I was really inspired by early Impressionists and that whole idea of going out down to the river and painting people playing around and having fun.
Mm.
Appeals to me tremendously because that's the sort of life that I would like to be leading as well.
Mm-hmm. What would you like people to remember or to experience once they've encountered one of your paintings?
What I'm trying to achieve is not just to say, well, here's a picture of trees in a park in a certain place. It's not about the geographical location. It's about the sensory experience of being in a landscape, whether it's a hot day, cold day, different weather, all those things. I want to give the viewer that feeling that they can feel the sun or the wind. There is a certain appeal to that sort of impressionist painting. It's meant to be real, meant to
Mm-hmm.
feel real, not an overly romantic approach either.
What are 3 ingredients that are just must have ingredients for one of your paintings?
The first thing is a good impression of light, and that is done through various ways. The light and dark elements in the painting. The nature of the brushwork is also extremely important. I'm not a fan of blended surfaces and flat painted surfaces. So I want to be able to enjoy a painting up close for its textural nature, and then also at a distance for that illusion, whatever illusion the art's trying to create. So brushwork is very important. I think ultimately the nature of the color, a strong sense of clean color. It's hard to actually describe.
Mm-hmm.
You'll know it when you see it. Often artists we're using all pretty much the same sort of paints, but being able to allow that paint to really stand out is quite a difficult trick to achieve. So that remains a constant challenge. So
Mm-hmm.
I think those 3 aspects come together and on a good day can make a painting really stand out.
Yeah, really sparkle. Yeah.
Mm.
And what do you enjoy the most about being an artist?
Yeah, I could say that it helps to keep me calm whenever I'm feeling at a loose end and things aren't coming together. I kind of drop what I'm doing and just go and do some painting. So that does a lot for me, a lot of good. And sometimes I get lost in what day of the week it is because you get caught up in the creative process, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's Thursday or Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole idea of hating Mondays and then just living for Friday, that's all
The
gone.
weekend. Yeah.
And that's, I think, is a tremendous blessing.
Mm.
And then, ultimately, I feel extremely fulfilled at a personal level with when I do a painting that I'm happy with.
Mm. And no more wearing a tie to an office.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I got rid of.
And to get to the other side of that spectrum, what do you dislike about being an artist?
Probably just things that I do to, sabotage myself sometimes when I get particularly attached to a certain outcome. Maybe I want to exhibit some paintings and I believe that certain paintings are going to be really make a real impact, and it doesn't work out that way.
Mm-hmm.
The reception from others to those were not what I thought they would be,
Mm-hmm.
and then I have to go back and think, well, what was the issue there?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just timing, or it's just I've got to remember not to get overly attached to the outcomes and rather just focus on doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm not caught up in that whole cycle of expectation and disappointment.
Mm.
And I think that happens with every artist.
What does your week look like Monday to Friday? Can you just briefly tell us about your artist routine?
I do keep a calendar and then I studiously ignore it. But I think about things and then 2 days before I will start feverishly completing it. So if
Mm-hmm.
I have any deadlines for articles or anything coming up, I will deal with those.
Mm-hmm.
As far as getting down to painting is concerned, I don't start first thing in the morning. Usually, I will start the day off with walking the dog, going down to the beach, doing a few chores around the house, just checking in with the kids, and then getting to my emails, seeing if there's anything important I need to sort out that happened overnight, because being in the southern hemisphere, a lot of my correspondence comes overnight. So towards the middle of the day, I will start painting. The latest by about 4, I'll down brushes, and then that's family time. And if I feel I have to and need to, I will also paint in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the lighting set up for that,
Mm-hmm.
so I can paint for an hour or so in the evening. And then in between, I will be doing a day devoted to video for my YouTube channel, and then maybe a few hours to writing. I must say one last thing on that is, to every artist, is work out your own process, of course, but a balance is very important, and I can't ignore other things, whether it's my family or just having some fun time as well.
This is a challenge for many artists, finding the balance between actually making their work and selling their work and marketing their work and being busy on social media. That sometimes that can be super overwhelming.
Sometimes it does feel like I'm spending a lot of time on the business side of it.
Mm,
But I can say the important part is the art does come first,
mhm,
right? So your painting is first.
mm,
Don't ignore that.
mm,
Your growth as an artist must come first.
mm,
And sometimes you've got to ignore the noise and ignore the people who want your attention to get back to your art. Just ground yourself in your art, number one,
mhm.
and then promote it, show it, etc.
You have the YouTube channel, you have an Instagram account with many followers, Facebook, you're active, and you do that all yourself, your videoing and your vlogging and
Yes,
your courses.
I'm a real waste of time when it comes to delegation. So I
You
do
do.
everything.
You're a
I do it
one-man
all
band.
myself.
Mm,
And yeah, I just enjoy figuring it out. And
mm-hmm.
there's so much information out there to help
Yeah,
you. So I just have a go.
yeah. So you did research on how it all worked. You learned yourself, did self-study, and you
The
just
whole
press
thing,
play.
exactly.
Mm, through trial and error. Then I want to just focus a little bit about you as the teacher, but you also have a online training courses that people can follow. Have students all over the world. If I read the testimonials on your website,
Yes.
is really appreciated internationally.
When we were planning on going into an artist life and launching an art business, teaching was definitely part of that plan. Although I don't know why, because I'm quite an introverted person and definitely prefer my own company
Mhm.
most of the time. And I suppose that's fairly typical of artists that I know. I did some workshops. I quite enjoyed them. I must say, uh, the people attending workshops were lovely people, and I still will do that from time to time. And I quickly realized that a lot of people, even in South Africa, couldn't get away,
Mm,
didn't have the time or the money to spend on going to a workshop. So I put some short lessons out on video, and they were well received. People still enjoyed watching the videos.
mhm,
And it just grew from there. And the feedback I was getting was increasingly positive. And find out what people wanted to know, what was useful to them. That's really the crux of it.
mm,
And video gave me an opportunity to quickly address those needs, and that's how it turned into. Now I've got basically a school that's online from beginner to fairly advanced in dealing with different media. I've met some amazing people all over the world that way. Now, I've had some artists, in this case in the US, who were going through difficult times, whether it was a family situation, maybe a spouse had passed away, that sort of thing, and the surviving spouse trying to find her feet or trying to find his feet, and art became a part of that healing process. Another artist, she had never done figure studies, never painted a figure, and in one of my courses I had was devoted to an easy way to turn a complicated subject into a simple one, and she produced this painting, and I was so blown away by the quality of it, and she was so excited about it, and I shared a picture of her painting to all my channels as well, and it just reminded me of how powerful this can be. What I'm really doing is showing people exactly the lessons that I learned. I haven't held anything back or try to just show half this or half that.
In your opinion, Malcolm, is art important, and why?
Yes, I think it's really a critical situation we're in worldwide. I must say, I think the idea of art and creativity has definitely had a resurgence. I do get the idea that a lot of people are more receptive to creativity. We're faced with a lot of choices in the world we live in, and everything is so hectic. There are so many demands made for our attention, for the way we think, the way we should behave. And, there's a lot of illusion as well. People are spending too much time, I think, chasing after things that aren't real. Well, this is why art, I believe, is so important, because it's still a physical thing. It's still old school, tactile, sensory. It involves you as a person to transform paint, as an example, or clay, to transform that into a work of art or a piece of a beautiful something is an incredibly important human activity, something uniquely human. And I believe everybody has that. It's not just the so-called artist. Every person has that creative need, that well that they've got to dip into. And I think for so many people who are ignoring it, it is creating so much problems. It could be their health, it could be their relationships, it could be their career is heading down the wrong road and they're feeling unfulfilled and unhappy. We see it in society in a larger extent. This communities that support art and foster the artistic spirit are more peaceful, they're happier.
What would you tell a parent whose son or daughter is thinking of taking an art education and coming home and saying, I want to be an artist?
There's no question in my mind that someone who is dedicated to following a career in art has every possibility of a successful life financially and emotionally. There is absolutely no reason why that person can't go on to have everything they dreamed about. I would certainly remind my children, who incidentally are all sort of arty and doing sort of creative stuff. So, but any parent who listens to this, I would certainly say that you've got to support your child if they're determined, and you certainly will know. I mean, I'm sure that child has been drawing or painting non-stop throughout their school life and lose themselves of hours into their drawing books and things like that. So it's pretty obvious when you look at it. But the tools that are available and the resources out there today make it so much easier, I believe, to learn how to actually run a business that also lets you express your art as well. Your life has got to be devoted to learning. You've got to learn everything that you can about the business of art and creating great art as well. Be fearless in your experimenting. Don't fear failure. You've got to try things and learn from the experience one way or the other.
Malcolm, I'm curious, what artists do you really admire and why?
I think ultimately, probably, obviously, Claude Monet is significant as somebody who really stuck to his creativity and was able to adapt and change as he went through his life.
Mm-hmm.
These sort of California impressionists, I'm thinking of people like Edgar Payne, William Went, and then the Spanish great Joaquim Sorolla,
Mm-hmm.
I think is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Contemporary artists like Kevin McPherson, who I admire terrifically. I think
Mm.
he's absolute gem. Um, Someone from your part of the world, Roos Schuring.
Mm-hmm.
She is a Dutch artist who I admire a lot for her sheer guts and grit
Mm-hmm.
and forging her own career.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can learn a lot from there. And also, I really enjoy the Russian impressionists, contemporary Russian impressionists, that people like Daniel Volkov and Barto Dagarzapov, I hope I pronounced that right. I think he's Ukrainian actually, but
Mm-hmm.
they, I, I think their work follows a particular sort of school of and approach I find very appealing. I think we can learn a lot from them.
Well,
But
that's quite a list. We can put
yeah,
them in the podcast notes so then
okay.
people can look them up and see and be inspired by them too. You've mentioned artists, but are there any books that were
Yeah.
crucial in your development so that you really think that's a must read?
I think one book that every artist should acquire is by Robert Henry called The Art Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
It's full of his anecdotes and a tremendous bond with artists back in the early 1900s. And it just goes to show you that not much has really changed.
No.
We all have the same fears, the same difficulties. I mentioned Kevin McPherson as an artist. He has some tremendous books that every artist who paints his sort of impressionist style should get as well.
Mm-hmm. And quotes, I love quotes, little nuggets of truth that sum up deep things within a few words. I don't know if you have a favorite quote that you have in your studio or that you live by.
Uh, yeah, I actually, when I did grab my copy of the Art Spirit and I just opened a page and that I had marked sometime years ago. And I think the one quote there, he says, "All things change according to the state we are in. Nothing is fixed." I think that is simply an attitude that we all need to remember and keep in mind, is not be attached to the past, to let that go, live in the present and accept change.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most important things is always have something to look forward to. If you've got something to look forward to, whether it's small or significant or something in between, you don't get bogged down in negativity. So have those little things set up to help you along.
Mm-hmm.
And then clearly we've got to make the most of the time we have. All right, that's fundamental. The only thing we can't buy on the shops or online is time.
Mm.
So if you can live every day as if it's your last day, appreciate that time is the most important thing. And have respect for others. Don't envy other artists. Don't give in to fear and self-doubt. Be open to saying yes.
What advice would you give the 20-year-old version of Malcolm? Is there anything you would have done differently?
Yes, I would have probably have said, have more faith in yourself, not to waste so much time. I think that was one of the things I did do a lot of. But yeah, I would definitely have gone with my own feelings a lot more than following what others said was best for me.
The expectations.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned that one of your life mottos is looking forward to something. What are you looking forward to? What does your future look like? Is there a commission you're working on or something happening that's worth mentioning?
One of the things which would completely blow my mind is joining a few of the artists that I admire internationally and painting with them or meeting them and doing some painting with them.
Mm.
I mean, could you imagine doing some plein air work with Kevin McPherson, perhaps in New Mexico? That would be an absolute dream.
Yeah, the shared experience of
Yes, I
sharing your
think
passion and
just that shared experience would be far more important than hanging a painting in a museum or a gallery. It is about the experience of creating.
Malcolm, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can connect with you?
I have my website, malcolmdeweyfineart.com, and it's quite easy to contact me there.
There you have it, Malcolm Dewey's artist journey. I admire the fact that he took bold steps to follow his true passion. He listened to that inner voice that said, "You are an artist." He took calculated steps, involved his family in his decision making, and slowly made the transition to become the full-time artist he is now. Please take the time to head over to his website and check out his courses, coaching, and resources. I will put the link in the notes of the podcast. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Malcolm has a special resource for the listeners of the Help I Am Artist podcast. It is an ebook in which he shares his proven tips for mixing and applying colors. You can access this ebook at www.soniasmallhere.com/21. It is a generous resource that will help you get a better grip of using color in your painting. Thanks for that, Malcolm. That's all for this week. Next week, I'll be back with another episode of the Help I'm Artist podcast. Don't forget to share this podcast and to leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. This makes the podcast more visible and helps other artists find it. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, bye for now.